The mountain colony of Drakmor had stood for 3,000 years, carved into the black stone cliffs that touch the clouds. Dragons lived here in harmony, their massive forms gliding between the peaks, their roars echoing across the valleys below. They were magnificent creatures, scales gleaming like precious metals, wings that could block out the sun, and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Among them lived exactly one human, a situation that had caused quite a stir when it first began 5 years ago. His name was Thomas, and he had arrived at Drakmor not as a conqueror or a thief, but as a refugee. His village had been destroyed by a rock slide, and he had climbed the mountain seeking shelter, expecting to die in the cold. Instead, he had been found by Elder Vermithrax, the oldest dragon in the colony, who saw something in the shivering human that others might have missed. Perhaps it was compassion, or curiosity, or simply the whim of an ancient being who had seen too much death. Whatever the reason, Thomas was allowed to stay. The dragons had watched him carefully at first, this small, soft creature who could barely survive the mountain cold. Thomas was given a small cave near the lower levels, far from the important chambers where the Dragon Council met. He was provided with furs and firestones, enough to keep him alive through the harsh winters. In return, he asked only to be useful. This puzzled the dragons greatly. Humans in their experience were either terrified of dragons or sought to steal from them. Thomas seemed to be neither. He began small. The dragons, for all their power and magic, had difficulty with delicate tasks. Their claws, each as long as Thomas's forearm, could not easily manipulate small objects. Thomas noticed this and offered his services. He repaired damaged jewelry, organized the vast libraries where dragons kept their records, carved on metal tablets, and helped maintain the intricate water channels that ran through the mountain. His fingers could reach places dragon claws could not. His size allowed him to enter cracks and crevices that even the smallest dragon could not access. But what truly changed everything was his relationship with the hatchlings. Dragon eggs were precious, rare things. A dragon might lay only 3 or 4 eggs in their entire 1,000-year lifespan. When the eggs hatched, the entire colony celebrated. The hatchlings, called Dragonlings until they reached their first century, were protected fiercely by all adults. They were kept in the central nursery, a vast, warm chamber heated by volcanic vents, watched over constantly by rotating guards. Thomas had first entered the nursery by accident, chasing a small mechanical toy that had rolled away from his workspace. He had frozen when he saw the 6 dragonlings playing in the chamber, certain he would be torn apart for intruding. But the dragonlings had been fascinated by him instead. They had never seen a human before. They approached him carefully, sniffing with their small snouts, touching his clothes with their tiny claws. The largest of them, a golden female named Brightscale, had climbed directly onto his lap and fallen asleep. The adult dragons who rushed in, alerted by the monitoring spells, had expected to find carnage. Instead, they found Thomas sitting very still, barely breathing, with a dragonling purring contentedly against his chest. Elder Vermithrax had laughed, a sound like thunder rolling through caves. From that day forward, Thomas was granted the unprecedented privilege of entering the nursery whenever he wished. He became something of a nursery helper, though no such position had existed before. Dragonlings were endlessly energetic and curious, constantly getting into trouble. Thomas's size and agility made him perfect for retrieving them from dangerous perches or fishing them out of water channels. He invented games to tire them out, told them stories from human folklore, and sang them songs when they couldn't sleep. The adult dragons were bemused, but grateful. Watching hatchlings was exhausting, even for beings of immense power. The dragonlings adored him. To them, Thomas was not a weak human, but the most entertaining creature in the entire colony. He could make funny sounds, could tickle them in ways that dragon claws could not, could create wonderful toys from wood and metal, and most importantly, seemed to have infinite patience for their games. They followed him around the colony like a parade of colorful, scales puppies, much to the amusement of the adult dragons. Thomas's cave gradually transformed. The Dragonlings brought him gifts, rocks they thought were pretty, feathers from mountain birds, pieces of crystal from deep caves. His walls became covered with drawings the Dragonlings made, scratched into slate tablets with their claws. He built them a special play area near his cave, with ramps and tunnels sized for their small bodies. Sometimes he would wake to find one or two Dragonlings had snuck away from the nursery to sleep near his fire, and he would have to carry them back before the adults noticed. The colony had never been happier. The presence of the human had brought unexpected joy, especially to the youngest generation. Elder Vermithrax often remarked that Thomas had done more to unite the colony than any treaty or law. Even dragons who had initially objected to a human living among them had to admit that the children loved him, and that was worth something. Then came the festival of first flight. Once every 5 years, the colony celebrated the Dragonlings who were ready to attempt their first real flight from the mountain's edge. It was a grand event, with the entire colony gathering to watch, to encourage, to catch any youngling who faltered. The 6 Dragonlings of the current generation, all now about 7 years old in human terms, were finally ready. They had been practicing for months, gliding from lower ledges, strengthening their wings. The festival lasted 3 days, filled with feasting, music, and storytelling. Dragons came from other colonies to witness the event. The mountain rang with celebration. Thomas participated as much as he could, though he felt out of place among so many dragons. He spent most of his time with the Dragonlings, who were nervous about their upcoming flights despite their excitement. He reassured each one, told them they would be magnificent, helped them groom their wings. On the second night of the festival, Thomas retired early to his cave. The celebrations had grown loud and intense as dragons boasted of past glories and challenged each other to flying competitions. He was tired, and tomorrow was the actual flight ceremony. He wanted to be well rested to support his young friends. He fed his fire, wrapped himself in furs, and fell asleep to the distant sounds of dragon songs echoing through the mountain. He woke several hours later to screaming, not the joyful roars of celebration, but the terrible sounds of panic and anguish. Thomas threw off his furs and rushed into the corridor, his heart pounding. Dragons were flying in all directions, calling out in their ancient language. He grabbed a passing juvenile dragon, one he recognized from the markets. "What happened?" Thomas shouted over the chaos. "The Dragonlings," the young dragon gasped. "They're gone, all 6 of them, vanished from the nursery." Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. The nursery was the most protected place in the entire colony, watched by magic and guards constantly. For all 6 Dragonlings to disappear was impossible, yet it had happened. He released the young dragon and began running toward the nursery, his mind racing through terrible possibilities. Kidnapping, magic, cave-ins, predators, each thought worse than the last. The nursery was in chaos when he arrived. Adult dragons crowded the entrance, their massive bodies blocking the way. He could hear Elder Vermithrax's voice booming commands, organizing search parties. Thomas squeezed through the gaps between dragon legs, his human size an advantage for once. Inside the nursery, several dragons were examining every corner with magic, their eyes glowing with power. The sleeping alcoves where the Dragonlings should have been were empty, the warm stones still radiating heat, but holding no small, sleeping forms. "No signs of struggle," one of the searchers reported. "No foreign magic detected. No scent trails leading out." "How is that possible?" another dragon demanded. "They cannot simply vanish into air." Elder Vermithrax stood in the center of the chamber, his ancient scales dulled with worry. He noticed Thomas and gestured him forward. "Human, you know the younglings better than anyone. Where would they go?" Thomas's mind raced through everything he knew about the 6 Dragonlings. Brightscale was brave and bold. Ember was cautious but loyal. Copper loved exploring. Shadowscale was clever and mischievous. Silverstone was gentle and kind. Skyfire was the smallest but the most determined. Where would they go together, all six of them, in the middle of the night during a festival? "Have you checked all their favorite spots?" Thomas asked. "The game room, the warm pools, the crystal caves?" "Search parties are covering all known locations," Vermithrax replied. "But Thomas, the nursery was guarded. The spells were active. How did they leave without anyone noticing?" A horrible thought occurred to Thomas. What if they didn't go far? What if they used the small passages, the ones too tight for adult dragons? Vermithrax's eyes widened. "The maintenance tunnels. By the ancestors, we didn't think to check those. They're so small, so dark. Why would hatchlings enter them?" "Because they wanted an adventure?" Thomas suggested grimly. "Or because they were following something?" The search intensified. Dragons called out through every corridor and chamber. Magic swept through the mountain like waves, seeking the unique signature of young dragon life. Thomas joined a group checking the lower tunnels, crawling through spaces barely large enough for his body. His torch cast dancing shadows on stone walls. He called their names until his voice grew hoarse. Hours passed with no results. The festival had ended abruptly, all celebration forgotten. Visiting dragons joined the search, spreading out across the mountain and the surrounding peaks. Dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with pink and gold, and still the Dragonlings remained missing. Thomas emerged from another empty tunnel, his clothes torn and dirty, his hands scraped from climbing. He was exhausted but refused to stop. The thought of those six small creatures lost somewhere, possibly hurt or frightened, kept him moving. He knew the adult dragons could survive almost anything, but Dragonlings were still vulnerable. They needed warmth, food, protection. He stood on a lower ledge, looking out at the growing light. The sun was rising over the distant plains, turning the world from gray to gold. Where could they be? He tried to think like a dragonling, to imagine what would be exciting enough to make all six of them sneak away together. The festival had been full of distractions, adults busy celebrating, guards perhaps not as attentive as usual. It would have been the perfect time for an adventure. But where? He thought about all the places he had taken them, all the games they had played, all the stories he had told. Wait, stories. He had told them stories. Human stories about brave knights and hidden treasures in secret places. And there was one story in particular they had loved, about a hero who found a cave filled with stars. He had based it on a real place, a small cavern he had discovered in his first year at Drakmor, where crystals in the ceiling caught light and sparkled like stars. He had shown it to the Dragonlings once, months ago. The cavern was outside the main colony structure, reached by a narrow path along the mountain's eastern face. It was too small for adult dragons, but perfect for Dragonlings. Or for a human. Thomas's heart began to pound. Could they have remembered? Could they have decided to visit it during the festival, when no adults would stop them? He didn't waste time reporting his theory. Every moment counted. He began climbing along the path he remembered, moving as quickly as he dared. The trail was treacherous, just a thin line of stone along a sheer cliff face. One wrong step would send him falling into the abyss below. But he had walked this path before, and fear gave him focus. The sun rose higher, and the stone beneath his hands grew warm. The entrance to the crystal cavern was exactly where he remembered, a crack in the stone barely wide enough for his shoulders. He squeezed through, his torch held ahead of him. The tunnel opened into the small chamber beyond, and his torchlight immediately reflected off 1,000 crystal points in the ceiling, creating that star-like effect that had inspired his story. And there, in the center of the chamber, curled together in a pile of colorful scales, sleeping soundly, were all six missing Dragonlings. Relief flooded through Thomas so powerfully that his knees nearly buckled. They were safe. They were together. They were sleeping peacefully, their small chests rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of dreams. Around them were scattered treasures they had brought, small toys and favorite rocks, as if they had planned this as a camping adventure. Brightscale's wing was draped over Ember. Copper was curled around Silverstone. Shadowscale and Skyfire were nestled together like puzzle pieces. Thomas approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. As he drew closer, he noticed something else. They weren't just sleeping randomly. They had arranged themselves in a specific pattern, and at the center of their sleeping pile was a small, empty space, just about the right size for a human. His pack was there, the one he had been missing from his cave. They had taken it. They had brought it here. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just an adventure. This was planned. They had wanted him to come with them, but he had gone to sleep early. So they had left him a trail, taken his pack so he would know something was wrong, and waited for him here. In their young minds, this had probably seemed like a wonderful surprise, a secret adventure to share with their favorite human. They hadn't understood the panic they would cause. Thomas sat down carefully, settling into the space they had left for him. Immediately, even in their sleep, the Dragonlings adjusted. Brightscale's head came to rest on his lap. Ember's tail curled around his ankle. Copper sighed contentedly and shuffled closer. Within moments, Thomas found himself at the center of a sleeping pile of Dragonlings, their warmth surrounding him, their gentle breathing filling the crystal cavern with soft sounds. He should wake them. He should get them back to the colony immediately. The entire mountain was in panic, searching desperately. But for just a moment, Thomas allowed himself to simply sit there, holding these small creatures he had come to love like his own children. They had trusted him enough to wait for him here. They had wanted to share their adventure with him. The thought made his chest tight with emotion. He heard sounds from outside the cavern. The search had reached this area. He could hear dragons calling, wings beating against air. He needed to let them know the Dragonlings were safe. Carefully, trying not to disturb the sleeping pile too much, Thomas began to shift. Immediately, 6 pairs of eyes snapped open, glowing in the torchlight. "Thomas!" Brightscale squeaked happily. "You found us!" "We waited and waited." "We brought your pack," Copper added. "We wanted to have an adventure together, like in your stories." "We thought you would come when the sun went down," Shadowscale said, sounding apologetic. "But you didn't, so we fell asleep." Thomas felt torn between hugging them and scolding them. "You scared everyone," he said gently. "The whole colony is searching for you. They thought something terrible had happened." The Dragonling's excitement faded, replaced by guilt. Silverstone's eyes grew large and shiny with tears. "We didn't mean to make everyone scared. We just wanted an adventure." "We left clues," Ember protested. "We took your pack so you'd know." "I know," Thomas said, reaching out to stroke Ember's scales. "And I did figure it out. But we need to get you back home right now. Can you all fly? The path outside is too dangerous to walk." "We can fly," Skyfire announced proudly. "We've been practicing." Thomas moved to the cavern entrance and called out to the searching dragons. His voice echoed across the cliff face. Within moments, dragons appeared, their massive forms filling the sky. Elder Vermithrax arrived first, his ancient face cycling through relief, anger, and joy in rapid succession. "They're here! They're safe!" Thomas called out. "All 6 of them, unharmed." The news spread like fire through the mountain. Roars of relief and joy echoed from peak to peak. Dragons rushed toward the crystal cavern, and Thomas had to call for them to give space. The path was narrow, the cavern small. The Dragonlings needed room to emerge and fly to safety. One by one, the Dragonlings squeezed through the narrow entrance, blinking in the bright morning sun. They looked small and guilty, facing the assembled adults. But they also looked proud. They had flown here on their own, had survived the night without help, had accomplished their secret adventure. As frightened as they were of being in trouble, part of them was clearly pleased with themselves. Thomas emerged last, squeezing through the crack in the stone. The moment the adult dragons saw him, understanding seemed to wash over them. The Dragonlings had been with the human. That's why they were safe. That's why they seemed calm and happy rather than traumatized. Somehow, even in their mischief, even in their dangerous adventure, Thomas's presence had protected them. Or perhaps they had been waiting for his presence, sleeping safely because they knew he would find them. Elder Vermithrax flew close, his massive head level with the small ledge where Thomas stood. "You found them." "They left me clues," Thomas replied. "They wanted me to come with them. This was supposed to be an adventure we shared." The old dragon's eyes softened. "They love you very much, small human. To them, you are not a different species. You are simply Thomas, their friend, their protector, their companion in adventure. They trusted you to find them. They waited for you in their sleep because they knew you would come." Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears. The Dragonlings were flying now, circling in the air with their parents, being scolded and embraced simultaneously. But they kept looking back at him, making sure he was watching, making sure he saw how well they could fly. Brightscale performed a small loop, showing off. Copper dove and then rose rapidly, his copper scales flashing in the sun. They were celebrating, even in their trouble, because their adventure had worked. They had flown to the crystal cave. They had spent the night like brave explorers, and Thomas had found them, just as they knew he would. The flight back to the colony was slow and careful. The Dragonlings were tired from their unauthorized adventure, and the adults flanked them protectively. Thomas rode on Vermithrax's back, his first time flying on Dragonback, watching the 6 small shapes ahead. The sun was fully risen now, bathing the mountain in golden light. Below, the valley stretched green and peaceful, unaware of the night's drama. When they landed in the main courtyard, the entire colony was waiting. Dragons filled every available space, perched on ledges and roofs, craning their necks to see. The moment the Dragonlings touched down, a cheer went up that shook the mountain. The fear had transformed into relief, the relief into joy. The lost children had returned. But then came the reckoning. The Dragonlings were brought before the Dragon Council, with Thomas standing beside them. The council chamber was vast and imposing, carved from a single enormous cave deep in the mountain's heart. Seats were carved into the walls in ascending rings, each one size for a full-grown dragon. The council itself consisted of the 12 eldest dragons in the colony, with Vermithrax at their center. The charges were serious. Leaving the nursery without permission, endangering themselves, causing colony-wide panic during a festival, using secret passages meant for emergencies. The Dragonlings stood in the center of the chamber, their heads lowered, their wings drooping. They understood the severity now. The adventure that had seemed so exciting in planning now felt foolish and dangerous in retrospect. Thomas wanted to defend them, to explain, but he was not a dragon and had no voice in council matters. He stood to the side, trying to send them silent support. Brightscale kept glancing at him, drawing courage from his presence. "Why did you do this?" Vermithrax asked, his voice gentle despite the formal setting. "You know the rules. You know the dangers. What possessed all 6 of you to sneak away in the night?" Brightscale stepped forward, the unofficial leader, as always. "We wanted an adventure, Elder. Thomas tells us stories about brave heroes who explore and discover things. We wanted to be brave like that. We found the crystal cave months ago when Thomas showed it to us. We thought it would be wonderful to spend the night there, watching the crystals shine. We planned to be back before dawn. We didn't mean to scare anyone." "You took Thomas's pack," another council member noted. "Why?" "We wanted him to come with us," Ember spoke up, "but he went to sleep early, so we took his pack, thinking he'd notice and follow us. We thought he'd arrive soon after we got to the cave. We were going to surprise him, but then we got tired and fell asleep waiting." The council exchanged glances. One of them, a dragon named Ironwing, spoke. "So this adventure, This dangerous flight in the dark to an isolated cave outside the colony was undertaken because you wanted to imitate the stories Thomas told you? No, Shadowscale said quickly. Not just imitate, we wanted to make our own story, one we could tell Thomas later. We wanted him to be proud of us. Thomas felt his heart clench. They had risked everything because they wanted to impress him, to show him they could be brave like the heroes in his stories. The responsibility of that crashed over him like a wave. His stories, meant to entertain and comfort, had inspired them to danger. "May I speak?" Thomas called out. The council turned to him, surprised. Humans never spoke in council chambers without explicit invitation, but Vermithrax nodded permission. "This is my fault," Thomas said, his voice carrying in the vast space. "I told them stories of adventure without properly teaching them the difference between stories and reality. I showed them the crystal cave without emphasizing how dangerous the path was. I failed to consider that children, dragon or human, might try to imitate the tales they love. I take full responsibility." "No!" all 6 Dragonlings shouted together. Brightscale turned to face him, her golden scales bristling. "Thomas, no! You didn't make us do anything. We chose this ourselves. We're not babies. We knew it was against the rules. We did it anyway. Don't take our punishment." Vermithrax held up one massive claw for silence. "Peace. Both the human and the hatchlings show honor in accepting responsibility. But let us be clear about what actually occurred. 6 young dragons, excited by stories and the celebration, made a poor choice. They ventured somewhere dangerous without permission. However, they demonstrated several positive qualities as well. They flew successfully to their destination. They stayed together. They left clues for Thomas. They waited safely rather than attempting the dangerous path at night. And most importantly, they trusted in Thomas to find them, a trust that proved well-founded." Another council member, a silver dragon named Moonsong, leaned forward. "The hatchlings erred, but their error came from good instincts. They wanted adventure, courage, independence. These are qualities we encourage in our young. The problem was not their desire, but their method. They should have asked permission. They should have included adults in their plan. They should have understood that courage without wisdom is merely recklessness." The council debated for some time. Thomas was asked to leave the chamber, along with the Dragonlings, to wait while the council decided on appropriate consequences. They sat together in an antechamber, the Dragonlings huddled around Thomas, seeking comfort. He held them close, stroking their scales, whispering reassurances. "Will they send us away?" Silverstone asked in a small voice. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're their children. They love you. They're just scared of what might have happened. Give them time." "Will they send you away?" Copper asked, voicing the fear that Thomas himself had been harboring. "I hope not," Thomas said honestly, "but if they do, I'll understand. I'm just a human living among dragons. That's always been unusual." "You're not just a human," Skyfire said fiercely, despite being the smallest. "You're Thomas. You're ours. If they send you away, we'll run away and find you." "You'll do no such thing," Thomas said, but he smiled as he said it. "Promise me, all of you, no more secret adventures without permission. No more worrying the adults. Promise?" "We promise," they chorused, though they didn't sound entirely sincere. Thomas suspected this wouldn't be the last adventure the Dragonlings attempted, but hopefully, future adventures would include adult supervision. Finally, they were called back into the council chamber. The 12 elders looked solemn, but not angry. Vermithrax spoke for them. "We have reached our decision. The 6 hatchlings will be restricted to the main colony areas for 1 full season. No flights beyond the outer perimeter. No unsupervised explorations. They will spend part of each day in study, learning proper safety protocols and the reasons for our rules. They will also perform service tasks for the colony, helping with maintenance and organization, so they understand the work required to keep everyone safe. The Dragonlings nodded acceptance. It was a fair punishment, neither too harsh nor too lenient. They would be bored, certainly, but they would be safe and they would learn. Thomas felt relief wash through him. Then Vermithrax turned to him. As for you, Thomas of the human lands, the Council has deliberated on your role in these events. Some argued you should be censured for the influence your stories had on impressionable young minds. Others argued you should be honored for finding the lost hatchlings when our own searches had failed. We have decided on a different course entirely. Thomas held his breath, waiting. We are expanding your role officially, Vermithrax continued. From this day forward, you are appointed Guardian of the Hatchlings, a position we are creating specifically for you. You will be responsible for the safety, education, and well-being of all Dragonlings in the colony. You will teach them, watch over them, and yes, tell them stories. But you will also teach them wisdom to temper their courage, caution to balance their curiosity, and patience to guide their enthusiasm. You will help them understand the difference between storybook adventures and real-world consequences. Thomas was stunned. I'm honored, but I'm just a human. I don't have magic or strength or the wisdom of long years. You have something equally valuable, Moonsong said. You have love for them. You proved it by finding them when we could not. You proved it by taking responsibility for their choices. You proved it by sitting with them through the night they waited for you, even not knowing they waited. The hatchlings trust you absolutely. That trust is precious and powerful. We ask that you continue to earn it, now with our full support and authority. The Dragonlings erupted in cheers, their punishment momentarily forgotten in their excitement. Brightscale actually tackled Thomas, sending him stumbling backward while the others piled on, creating a laughing scales mass of joy. The council watched with amusement that might have been smiles, if dragons smiled. The crisis had passed, transforming into something new and good. In the days that followed, Thomas's life changed significantly. His small cave was expanded into a proper dwelling, with space for teaching and playing. He was given access to the colony's full resources to create educational materials for the Dragonlings. A special outdoor area was constructed where hatchlings could practice flying under supervision. Thomas designed obstacle courses, safety drills, and adventure simulations that satisfied the young dragons' need for excitement while keeping them in controlled environments. He also changed his storytelling. He still told tales of bravery and adventure, but now he included lessons about planning, about asking for help, about the difference between courage and foolishness. The Dragonlings listened just as eagerly, understanding that these new elements made the stories richer, not duller. They began to see that real heroes thought before acting, that true bravery included knowing when not to take a risk. The 6 Dragonlings who had caused the Great Panic became something of celebrities in the colony. Their adventure, once the danger had passed, became a story told and retold. They had flown alone to the Crystal Cave. They had survived a night on their own. They had trusted Thomas to find them, and he had. In a way, they had earned the adventure they sought, though not in the way they had imagined. And they had learned that the best adventures were those shared honestly, not hidden in secret. Thomas never forgot the moment of finding them, the relief and love that had overwhelmed him when he saw them sleeping safely together. He had come to Drakmor as a refugee with nothing, and these creatures had given him purpose, family, and a home. Being named their official guardian was recognition of something that had already been true in his heart. He was theirs, and they were his, across all the differences of species and size and power. The festival of first flight was rescheduled, delayed by the drama, but not canceled. When the day finally came, Thomas stood at the flight ledge with all 6 Dragonlings. They were nervous but ready, their wings strong from months of practice. One by one, they launched themselves into the air, catching the wind, soaring out over the valley far below. The colony cheered as each Dragonling successfully completed their first real flight, diving and climbing and turning, reveling in the freedom of the sky. Brightscale flew closest to the ledge where Thomas stood, close enough that he could see the joy in her eyes. She called out to him, a sound of pure happiness, and he waved back, pride swelling in his chest. They were growing up, these small creatures he had helped raise. Soon they would be too large for him to hold, too independent to need constant watching. But for now, in this moment, they were his charges and his friends, and he was their guardian, chosen and trusted. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Thomas sat with the 6 Dragonlings on a wide ledge, watching the stars emerge. They were tired from their flights, but too excited to sleep. They chattered about the feel of the wind, the view from high above, the places they would explore when their punishment period ended. "Will you always be our guardian?" Silverstone asked sleepily, her head resting on Thomas's leg. "As long as you need me," Thomas promised, "and maybe even after that." "We'll always need you," Ember said firmly. "Even when we're big and old and wise, we'll still need our Thomas." He smiled in the darkness, watching the stars appear one by one above the mountain peaks. He had climbed this mountain 5 years ago expecting to die, and instead he had found a life beyond anything he could have imagined. A human among dragons, small among giants, fragile among the mighty, yet valued and loved and given purpose. The Dragonlings fell asleep one by one, arranged around him in their preferred pile, warm and safe and content. Thomas stayed awake a while longer, memorizing this moment. Someday, historians might record the story of the human guardian who lived among the dragons of Drakmor. They might write about the night the Dragonlings went missing and were found at dawn, sleeping safely beside their human protector. But no history could capture what it felt like to sit here, surrounded by trust and affection, knowing that he had found his place in the world. The mountains stood eternal above him, the stars wheeled overhead, and the sleeping Dragonlings breathed in peaceful rhythm. Thomas closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift toward sleep, held safe by the creatures he protected, in the home he had never expected to find. Dawn would come again, bringing new days, new adventures, new challenges to face together. But for now, there was only this: warmth, safety, love, and the profound contentment of knowing exactly where he belonged.